Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Bienvenue à tous. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's a great pleasure to be here with such a wonderful panel. My name is Stephen Erlanger. I am the diplomatic correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. We are a sponsor of this wonderful forum, so it's always an honor to be part of it. We have an hour and we have a very good panel in front of us and an incredibly important topic, which is really how the world's governments can manage or not manage or try to manage this avalanche of data which is facing us, which we produce at huge amounts every second. And how we balance, state control, regulation, freedom of speech, privacy is just to me, one of the great questions of the next 5, 10, 15 years. So we have before us an extremely good panel. I'll just very briefly go through them. Thierry Breton, who is the European Commissioner for the Internal Market. He has been in business, he's been in government, he's been, I believe, finance minister, and has just had an interesting conversation with the head of Google, who had to apologize to him. We have Ajay Banga, who's the CEO of MasterCard, which is incredibly popular, important, and he's chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce. We have Mabel Miao, if I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who's co-founder and secretary general for the Center for China and Globalization, which is especially interesting given the new coming Biden administration. We have Nicolas Thierry, who's the CEO of Crédit Mutuel, and Philippe Van Elsen, who's global co-head of the TMT group, which is the sort of data group for Allen and Overy. So I'm going to start with a question that I've given the panelists, and I'm going to start with Commissioner Breton. Given the volume of data that's produced everywhere, every day, can governments reconcile the ideal of a free flow of data and ideas with the concept, the data ideal of privacy? Is effective regulation even possible? So, Monsieur Breton, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for allowing us to see this and to see by video some friends, from good friends, including from the other side of the ocean. So hello, Ajay. I'm missing our meetings, Ajay, but now I'm on this side of the Atlantic, and I am regulating the data space. So the answer, by the way, I will speak in French, if you don't mind, because I think we have translation, and so I will just give you time to put your earphones for the one who need earphones. But before that,
Monsieur.
Thanks a lot. And before that, the answer is absolutely it's possible. Not only it's possible, but it is necessary. So now, in order to explain this to you, I will switch in French. D'abord, il faut bien avoir en tête que la révolution des données que nous vivons, elle a démarré il y a une vingtaine d'années avec des acteurs qui étaient des acteurs naissants. Les plus grandes plateformes n'existaient pas ou avaient quelques employés, on le sait tous. Et au cours des 20 dernières années, ces plateformes qui au fond structurent aujourd'hui notre espace digital, notre espace informationnel, se sont développés, et notamment en capturant nos données personnelles. On le sait, ça s'est développé massivement aux États-Unis, parce qu'évidemment, les États-Unis sont un continent qui est ouvert. Ça s'est développé évidemment en Chine pour des raisons identiques. Et c'est vrai que ça a été plus compliqué en Europe parce que nous étions à l'époque encore fragmentés. Je vais y revenir dans un instant parce que les choses sont en train de changer rapidement et assez massivement. Pour faire face évidemment à un certain nombre d'abus, il faut appeler les choses comme elles sont, qui ont été constatées, vous les avez signalées du reste dans votre introduction, l'Europe a été obligée de réagir en mettant en place une politique, comme vous le savez, pour préserver ce que vous appelez la privacy, et c'est le fameux GDPR, qui est la protection des données personnelles, qui a été donc encore une fois une régulation. Elle s'est développée en Europe. On voit maintenant qu'elle est adoptée dans beaucoup de pays. C'était important et c'était nécessaire de le faire. Il y a maintenant devant nous, et je vais y revenir, nous avons une nouvelle vague de données qui nous attend, qui est beaucoup plus importante que les données personnelles. Ce sont les données industrielles ou B2B. Et évidemment, ces données, c'est tout ce qui est émergé de notre activité humaine. On sait en particulier que par le déploiement des réseaux 5G, on va multiplier de façon considérable ces données industrielles, que ce soit dans des véhicules connectés, dans des villes intelligentes, dans des hôpitaux intelligents, pour ne citer que quelques applications, quelques exemples. Pour vous donner une estimation, aujourd'hui, la planète digitale, c'est 40 zettabytes de données, c'est-à-dire 40 000 milliards de données. Et c'est dans cet univers-là que les plateformes dont vous parliez se répandent. Oui, on va organiser cet espace. Oui, on va mettre des obligations. C'est l'objet de l'acte législatif sur lequel je travaille, qui m'a valu, vous l'avez rappelé, des discussions avec certains de nos stakeholders. Et ce sera présenté, quoi qu'il arrive, au mois de décembre, et nous le ferons. Je pourrais vous donner des explications si vous le souhaitez pour dire comment on va le faire de façon simple, de façon rigoureuse et de façon déterminée. Mais le gros qui est devant nous, évidemment, ce sont ces données industrielles. Dans 4 ans, à la fin de mon mandat à la Commission européenne, vous l'avez rappelé, en charge du marché intérieur et du digital, eh bien, on aura entre 160 et 180 zettabytes, c'est-à-dire qu'on aura multiplié par 4 le nombre de données de la planète. Et c'est ces données industrielles, évidemment, qui vont créer une différence absolument au B2B gigantesque. L'endroit où on va en créer le plus, c'est en Europe. Donc, évidemment, mon travail, c'est de faire en sorte que ces données, tout en restant dans un environnement ouvert, évidemment, eh bien, elles soient traitées, stockées, processées en Europe selon nos règles, selon nos législations, et pas d'autres législations extraterritoriales. Donc, on a travaillé sur 3 actes législatifs. L'un qui s'appelle le Data Governance Act, qui sera présenté dans 15 jours. L'autre qui s'appelle le DSA, le Digital Service Act, qui va imposer aux plateformes des obligations donc pour précisément réguler notamment ce que vous appeliez tout à l'heure les conséquences de la privacy, la désinformation, les fake news, etc. Et le troisième, qui est le DMA, le Digital Market Act, qui va organiser un peu cet espace informationnel pour éviter évidemment qu'il y ait des situations de monopole qui se créent, de gatekeepers, comme on dit, un peu comme on a fait pour organiser les autres espaces qui ont façonné au cours des siècles passés l'activité humaine, l'espace territorial, et puis l'espace maritime, et puis l'espace aérien, où il a fallu réguler. Eh bien, on régule désormais, simplement, pas de façon agressive, mais de façon claire, donc cet espace informationnel, avec une ambition, hein, encore une fois, c'est de donner une visibilité. Si on regarde le dernier acte législatif, c'était la directive e-commerce, elle était il y a 20 ans.
Thank you.
À l'époque,
Thank you for sort of laying that out, Mr. Breton. Merci. Thank you for laying that out. I'm sure we'll get into the details a bit later, but we should get some others to respond, if you don't mind. Mr. Bonga, you're dealing in the world of commerce, of credit. Do you see government regulation as vital to your business, or does it get in the way? What's your response to this same question?
Well, no, first of all, I believe that that people like Thierry, who I have known for some years, they understand both sides of the picture. And I have no disagreement with the idea of managing things in a way that is safe, that can be governed, that allows for competition. I actually think he's laying out the parameters correctly. So first of all, let me start with that businesses work, but businesses like us, we work with guide rails and rules that governments lay out. And so I'm in favor of having clear guide rails, clear rules. I think they create level playing fields for people to work with. And to give you an example on GDPR, we've actually subscribed to GDPR, not just for our European business, but we've said that irrespective of where you live around the world, we will give you the protection of GDPR rules because we believe they are the appropriate rules for a consumer. And so to answer your question in one word, yes, I am a supporter of government regulation, done well, done in a way that allows competition and done in a way that enables innovation and participation in global economies.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for being concise. Ms. Mabel Miao, is China willing to play along with these rules, do you think? Or does China want to set up its own structures for data use, data protection, data ownership? What do you think?
Okay, thank you. I'm so glad to return to Paris Peace Forum. In the past 2 years, I participated this very well, but this time we use digital tool to get back together. I'm
afraid you've frozen a bit. Can you try again? And if not, we will move on. Until Ms. Miao can come back, Nicola Telly, why don't we come to you?
Slide to be addressed, but it's not serious as reported that one has to give up his or own privacy to the state. During the pandemic period in China, Alibaba developed a software called Health Code. It can automatically record the footprint of the smartphone owner. When the code turns green, it indicates the owner has not access to the infected area, thus provides he or she is safe. The code does help institutions and the public identify people who has been possibly infected. I think most Chinese accept the health code to exchange their own safety. They give up their own privacy for a larger public good. Health code example is an unusual case because COVID-19 has struck hard to the public health system and the economy development in China. I do hope that all of the privacy will be observed in normal situation. Free flow of the data should give way to privacy and in some circumstances, giving way to data sovereignty. I believe the Cambridge Analytica scandal has taught us many lessons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've raised a very interesting point, which is not all data is necessarily the same. I mean, there's personal data, but perhaps there's health data, or there's data that's very important for the sort of national well-being. The problem is you have to trust your governments to decide. We started to go when you froze to Nicola. Do you want to pick up on that topic?
Well, thank you very much. I totally agree that not all data are equal and that we have a certain room for improvement because, of course, health data is, for me, inalienable. We should establish a principle of inalienability for health data. I also think that financial data are sensitive and we should have a special protection on financial data. And finally, I think that the European Union has a key role in this field, and I'm very happy to listen to Thierry Breton and his future initiatives. Personally, I think 3 initiatives would be very much welcome. First, to improve these GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, notably to establish the principle that some data are inalienable, such as health, and some are sensitive. The second initiative, I think, is about also security, because there is in this data governance a question of balance to be established between freedom and protection. And I'm a bit worried when I see some, for me, naive initiatives such as the Payment Services Directive, where I see data moving around from protected places to unprotected places with users not understanding the risk involved. So I think more is to be done on data protection. And finally, for me, data is also about IT infrastructures, because at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure that companies have a nationality, that servers have also a nationality. And we should be very, very careful in establishing the IT infrastructures in some countries with associated regulations and with associated protections. And I think these 3 elements, GDPR, less naive initiatives on payments, and localization of infrastructures are really key for the European Union, but also for all companies, in order to define a better field for consumers, but also for citizens.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Mr. Van Elsen, do you think governments are capable of this kind of regulation? I mean, we hear them talk a lot about what needs to be done, and then sometimes when they do it, we ask ourselves, well, was that really the right answer?
Thank you so much. It's an excellent question, and let me first thank you also for having me and participating in your conference. It's a huge pleasure. It's my first time, so I'm very grateful to be here with you. Excellent question. I think, you know, there's a few comments that I would like to make. For sure, Mr. Breton already referred to GDPR, and the other panel members as well. I think that clearly, you know, set the gold standard and made the EU, I would say, a global leader in data protection. We are expecting a number, and Mr. Breton referred already to 2 acts, but we're also expecting the act or the new regulation on data governance, on AI, on the new Data Act early next year. And there's a few comments that I wanted to make. I think the objectives are, I think, extremely good. I know are very, very legitimate to encourage data sharing, to create an open and competitive European cloud system. I was also very pleased. I think on Wednesday the German presidency issued and the Commission a communication on the setup of the European health data space. So very good initiatives. A few comments. First, I think it's important to sometimes take stock of existing legislation and to take one step back and see whether certain measures can be improved indeed. And we can give a few examples in a minute if need be. A second point I would like to raise is let's not issue regulations, or be careful not to issue regulations when not required to safeguard European values, and when doing so could even stifle innovation, could even undermine innovation. You could say, let's regulate data ownership, for instance. But I think that we have already existing IP rights, we have trade secrets, we have the law of contracts, we have tools to monetize data, to exploit data. That would not be needed. A third point, data sharing, for instance. Let's encourage also contractual freedom. In the past, IP was the driver for innovation, and the Commission issued blocks exemptions to kind of stimulate innovation. I think you could do the same for data and say, look, why not issue a block exemption for data sharing that allows companies, to safely and in a legally predictable way share data. Interoperability is extremely important. I hear many clients saying, interoperability also in healthcare is really a big issue. Because we would like to share data, but the data are technically not connected. We can't combine them and create new data sets. And then two maybe last comments, data localization. I think we heard already other panel members referring to data sovereignty. I think this is a sensitive point, actually, because there is clearly an increasing wave of countries issuing data localization measures, and I think that could also undermine, the objectives of and the ambitions of the Commission for the data economy. So, I would like to express a word of caution because more and more countries are issuing localization laws, and they are, I would say, damaging for our companies. And whilst I'm mindful that you should not kind of trade protection of personal data as a fundamental right against tax issues or lower tariffs of products, I think this is an element, adequacy discussions that could be discussed in the context of trade negotiations. And the last point, and then I'll close down. I think one of the regulations which we're all expecting to read with lots of excitement is, of course, the data governance regulation. And again, the purpose is to create an open market for data, open to the world but sovereign, and to exchange information between public hospitals, for instance. But there is a concern that such a regulation could amount to, I would say, a de facto localization obligation for companies. And this is not my personal opinion, but I just wanted to share a concern that I have seen that, pursuing with very good intentions I would say rather protectionist policy at home could also undermine maybe the credibility of the Commission when we are trying to remove barriers in other countries. And I'm also mindful that data localization should not hamper the competitiveness of our European companies and the ability to access expertise and data held in other countries, third countries. So yes, very good.
Really helpful.
Critical
very,
observations.
very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought I would go back to Thierry Breton to see if he wants to respond to any of these points or suggestions. Mr. Breton,
thank you.
And then to Antoine.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And when you stopped me, I was ready to answer already to all these questions. So, but I would like to thank Mr. Van Elsen to take care of the Commission the way he did. Mr. Van Elsen, in my previous life, I had probably a lot of customers. We were sharing a lot of customers. So thank you for this input, but nothing new. We know everything. And by the way, in order to do the right thing, don't worry, we understand everything. We are not naive. We are coming from the same world, and we are willing to do the same thing. So thank you for your consent for the Commission. But I decided to launch a global initiative worldwide, asking everybody who wants to contribute to send their ideas, remarks, and we got 3,000 contributions. We are the only continent who did this, including, by the way, of course, these remarks that you just made. So don't worry. I don't see where you saw in any documents some of your concern. We know exactly what we have to do. This is true that, by the way, for some data, like for example, health data, in some countries you even cannot share and transfer some data from one region to the other. By the way, same thing in the US. So don't worry. I know this extremely well. And my goal here is to make a big improvement, to be able to share this health data, guess what? Within Europe. We will be the first continent to have a global health data, of course, under very strict conditions for respecting, of course, anonymity and everything. So again, we are not naive. We understand everything. Do not worry. I don't know where you see that we are going to impose data localization for industrial data, but okay. And we just have to make sure that we take in consideration the specificity of some specific data and others, and don't be too anxious. In 2 weeks, you will have the first release of the data governance. It will be on November 18th, and then you will get the DSA, and then you will get the DMA. So, in a nutshell, because I think it was maybe not known, we took this extremely carefully. We are not here to regulate for the beauty and the wish of regulate. We are coming from the business. We understand this very well, but we have to do the job. We have to do the job, and and I will do the job while again making sure that while continue to be an open continent, we are an open continent. I just have to establish clear rules, because I know that for business, and remember, this will be for the next 20 years, in order to invest in Europe, in order for our companies in Europe to develop themselves, they need to understand what are our rules and how to organize themselves to fulfill these rules. Not more, but not less.
Okay, good. I mean, I'm afraid sometimes as a journalist, when I'm assured not to worry, I get really worried indeed. But we will move on. Mr. Bonga, you wanted to say something. I believe you put up your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I think when I made my opening comments, I talked about 3 or 4 factors that matter and how we develop this regulation. And Thierry just answered a number of them. But level playing field, not stifling innovation, obviously with security and privacy, those are important factors. Now, as my other role as chair of the International Chamber of Commerce, we've been arguing for a few aspects to be considered to ensure some of the global interoperability points that came up. And the first one of those is a suggestion that I made out of my years in banking. In the last crisis, we created what is called the FSB, the Financial Stability Board, which operated out of the G20 as a way for regulators and finance ministers to discuss policy and possible regulation to ensure interoperability, open markets, and yet a proper recovery. I think we may need something like that today for data and technology, the equivalent of a data and tech board, just like an FSB for tech. Think of it that way. I think someone like Thierry understands where I'm going with this idea, but it creates the right forum for this conversation. The second point is that I think you need a universally recognizable digital identity for people and businesses so that you can have access and protection at the same time. And in a way, this connects to Nicola's point about data moving under PSD from protected entities to less protected entities. We've got to make sure that when we do these things to enable innovation, we do them in a way that unintended consequences are not that innovation is equal to less protection. And I think that level playing field point comes in here again. And the final point I'd like to make is that think about the role of trade agreements or regional dialogue in this space. The APEC cross-border privacy rules have a very good framework on privacy and data that has allowed for the APEC countries to participate in this. In fact, in some ways, CPTPP and the USMCA and the DEPA between New Zealand, Singapore, and Chile are all of the same idea that you create transparency, to Thierry's last point, transparency and predictability for companies in this space. So these 3 things, a data and tech board like the FSB for tech, the idea of a digital identity that creates a level playing field of privacy and access, and finally, the importance of engaging in regional and global trade agreements that lay out transparently these rules will be really critical. I think when Europe completes the process it's going through, like it did with GDPR, you may well be the leaders of thought, but then that thought needs to translate into multilateral and trading agreements so we can all operate with common principles. That's the point I'm getting at.
Thank you, sir. I mean, you raise a number of good points. One of them is one I wanted to ask others about also, which is, you know, in a way, the protective principle of European regulation, which is very different from the American one, is it getting in the way of innovation? I think that's a very serious question because one gets the impression sometimes, certainly in Washington, that Europe is trying to regulate basically because it doesn't have the data champions, because of its competition rules. It's too small a market, and it's basically just trying to break up big American companies in the name of regulation, because protection stops European innovators from getting the money and the regulations that they need. Now, I know Mr. Breton wants to answer that, but I first, if you don't mind, sir, want to let others try, and then I will come back to you, of course. It was Nicola, I think, right, who put up your hand. Please, Nicola, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I think you gave the debate a very important way, which is where is the balance between freedom and innovation? And I think we should not, and I agree with Ajay, it's not a question of purely competitiveness or market. It's really, and even as responsible for a company, for me, it's really a question of public protection about the kind of society that we want. Because data is not a person and data is not a merchandise. This is really an element of our identity. This is an element of our freedom. And I remember this old Universal Declaration of the Rights in France, for example, and the natural rights were liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. And finally, it's not a bad text for a discussion on data, because we need to define some precise principles. And for example, for Crédit Mutuel as a company, we adopted the legal status of société à mission, so a company with a mission. And we have 5 missions. And in these 5 missions, we adopted the principle of the protection of private life, and we decided to avoid any data settings, any data sharings, because we think that the data, the financial elements of the situation of our customers are an element of their privacy, an element of their intimacy, and we want to refuse any sellings or sharings. Okay, it's our choice, but I truly think that for democracies, and I welcome very much the initiatives coming from Thierry Breton and the Commission. This is a key element of the future, because if we establish data as a purely economic good, I think that our freedoms, that liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression will suffer. Maybe it's big words, but I truly think that this is an element, a very important element of our debate.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mao, do you want to come in here?
Yes, thank you. And I would like to give some feedback while you gentlemen were talking. And I think the data localization does not indicate a fragmentary internet. It will be fragmentary if we fail to find solutions to build the reasonable connection among different data centers. GDPR provides a solution by cutting off identification and connection between individuals and data. In the future, new technology is one of these important solutions, first of all. Secondly, in China, many scholars think GDPR is very good. It defines personal data. And China should learn a lot from the GDPR and build up the China's own kind of GDPR to protect the privacy. But it has yet to define an overall category data. There are other data relevant to public good and national security. We need to find a balance between privacy and the public interest when we try to give a general definition on data. Thirdly, multilateral cooperation across borders is needed. Joint efforts from the state, enterprises, NGOs will contribute to build international mechanism of data regulation and cross-border data flow. I remember a few months ago, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi released Global Data Security Initiative and set some principles on global data cooperation. My Center for China and Globalization also had proposed 2 initiatives at the first Paris Peace Forum. I remember exactly 2 years ago, one project is called the World E-Commerce Alliance, B50. And aim to create a 50-member group specializing in digital economy to promote the sustainable development of a digital economy, including enhance the data security among the world. Finally, I would like to mention that China's internet penetration rate is close to 65% in the first half of this year. The EU and North America are more than 80%. Digital economy claimed more than 50% in GDP of EU and the US. China's digital economy took 36% of its GDP last year and expected to raise to 53% by 2025. The 3 sides are leading the development of the digital economy in the world and should cooperate together on the global data flow regulation. Okay, thank you.
Good, thank you very much. I promise to come back to Monsieur Breton. The floor is yours.
Monsieur Langer, comme on a à peu près le même âge, je vais me permettre de dire que vos commentaires sont un peu old-fashioned, with all my respect.
Ah bon?
Same age, yeah. A little bit old-fashioned. If you still believe that we are regulating because we are late, I'm afraid to say that you do not understand what's happening in the US. I'm afraid to say that you do not understand what's happening in the Senate in the US. I'm afraid to say that you didn't read the report.
Now you sound like Mr. Macron telling me I don't understand laïcité. Anyway, Mr. Breton, go ahead. Just be polite. That would be very much appreciated.
Just again, because it is not about being late or not. It is just speaking because it is a need for our society. And it's true that it's difficult. And it's true that we need to engage with as many stakeholders as possible. But at the end of the day, and I don't want to speak about again laicity or whatever, but you have seen what's happening on the networks, on both sides of the ocean. But my point, and I would like to focus on this, is that we need to organize ourselves for the new wave coming in, which is again the B2B and mainly the industrial data flow, which is coming in. And we need to organize it for some specific data, making sure that we'll be able to share it, balance on it. For the data altruism, making sure that we'll be allowed to give our data if it's necessary. For the one that we believe that we could share, of course, on a global basis. And we need, it is absolutely true, like, and I'm 100% in agreement with Ajay, we need a data global governance. But let's start with how we need to organize ourselves with the separation of this data. And again, industrial data has nothing to do, and the way we have ahead of us, nothing to do with personal data. This is exactly what we are going to work and what we will present in the next coming weeks. But it's not because we are late or whatever. And just to conclude, I would like to give you a concrete example. In order to support this data and to support this industrial data, we need a specific infrastructure. No one in the world today can provide it. I say no one, because you need to have specific latency. specific KPIs, specific cyber security protections, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with very, very precise services. And this is why we have decided in Europe to prepare, again, an alliance where, by the way, we will welcome everyone, just to be ready to offer the industrial cloud necessary to support this. And everyone will be welcome to join, but we have to establish the rules. This is exactly what I wanted to say, not more again and not less. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect, thank you. Because one of the things that struck me during this COVID crisis was everyone's efforts to set up warning systems for each other. And every country tried to do its own, and then in the end had to fall back onto Google or Apple to make their systems work. Do you think, one can break this kind of monopoly without cutting off the rest of the world the way China's trying to do that? I'm curious. I mean, I'm certainly someone who believes in sharing data that's useful, but there's awful lot of concern that with AI in particular, that big countries will have much bigger benefits than smaller countries simply because they can collect all this intelligence with less regulation than others. So I just wanted to throw that out to see if anyone wants to respond to that. And then we have some questions that have come in from an attentive audience. So I see Nicolas with his finger up.
Very, very important thing for me, which is IT architecture. The question you raised is fundamental, and I think we should, and I know that Thierry Breton is sensitive to this aspect, we should establish a full coherence between architectures and tools. And basically, I believe that we should come back to the basics of the IT industry with the mainframes, with dedicated and private clouds, with AI on these tools, and with a specific protection of data. This is key in order to establish a data governance. There is no possible data governance without data architecture, and no data architecture without a clear protection of the identity and privacy of people. So I'm very optimistic about the ability of the Commission of the European Union to contribute to this debate and to offer an alternative to the global platforms.
Very good. Please, Mr. Van Elsen, Philippe.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would just like to make a short comment. I think, as I said, and Mr. Breton also said, the GDPR was, set the gold standard for the world. And I'm very also, impressed by the work that is being done by the Commission and also by the group of experts on artificial intelligence and how to regulate it in a very focused, a very proportionate way, and focused on really, managing the high risk applications of AI. So I think that's extremely positive. I think where there is a request or an expectation for, or a need for more predictability is, we talk about sharing data, is about transfers of data out of the EU. And I just want to mention that's the important decision reached by the Court of Justice in the Schrems II case, which has invalidated, as you know, the Privacy Shield and also made it more onerous for companies to use the standard contractual clauses. And we have we've talked to 50, 60 companies, and the feedback is really quite important, I think, because they basically all raise the point that they're really struggling with the complexity of responding to these new, Schrems II requirements, need more time, need clear regulatory guidance, companies fear enforcement actions or claims from, I would say, privacy campaigners or activists. It's a major concern, and also in the context of Brexit, actually, by the way, whether data can be shared even with the UK after Brexit. So this is clearly, I think, an area where there is an expectation to create, regulatory predictability, and not just, I guess, to await what the US will adjust, but to to collaborate and to compromise on a more transatlantic level. And what strikes me on data transfers is that it's first of all, it has become a very technical, legalistic issue. And I'm sometimes concerned that the ordinary citizen or average business, what privacy are we trying to protect here? So it's a very legalistic issue, complex for companies, and we're expecting also other countries to adhere to actually the same standards. And I think what we're seeing is that is often challenging. Countries in other cultures, yes, other legal systems are not sometimes able to meet that same gold standard. And so there's also a question of, have we put the hurdle too high? Maybe yes, or do we need to rebalance a little bit? So this is again a strong plea, I think, global collaboration.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
No, that's good, because one of the questions, honestly, people sometimes have about Europe is you can set the standards, but without global champions, it's hard to remain a standard setter. We have lots of people listening, I'm told, from Nepal, Mozambique, Cameroon, Pakistan. And I do have a couple questions for the last 10 minutes or so that we have here. And I want to summarize two of them, which seem to me are similar. Someone asks, if you're securing data to protect people from a political perspective, where's the limit between sovereignty and sharing and protectionism? And then someone asks, and it's actually come up here, is there a need or a possibility to set up a kind of world regulatory body for this database digital economy? And whether you think all countries, including big countries, India, China, who are not per se Western countries, do you think they would go along with such a thing? So that's a big topic, but it seems to me, if people have something to say, that would kind of bring us to a very good conclusion. Mr. Bonga, please go ahead.
So the second part first, we're back to what I suggested in the Data and Technology Board. I believe that is an actual opportunity. It is not a regulatory body, but it's an advisory body, a bit like the FSB was done in the after the last crisis. And I think I've been beating the drum on that one now for the past 5 or 6 months at every public event when I speak. The first part, I think you've got to remember one thing. This issue of sovereignty and data flows is a very challenging one. If what you mean about data flows to keep them protected is they're protected wherever they are, then things like GDPR, but even more interestingly, things like the binding corporate rules. So back to the point about Schrems, the reason why MasterCard is able to operate through this situation is that we actually subscribe to the binding corporate rules principles, which is a code of conduct of privacy approved by data regulators. So we're in that space. Things like that are very helpful in allowing you to operate through data transfer while keeping yourself in the right places vis-a-vis rules. Now, if, however, what you're discussing is national security, then comes the question of which data is useful for police, terrorism, drug investigations, and the like. And that gets into a more difficult place. One of the things that helps there, there are a number of technical and legal provisions that help there, but data minimization helps. Tokens and encryption helps. The kind of things that are being created in response to GDPR where we are creating subsidiaries where the data is tokenized, then agitated, then tokenized again, and agitated again, allows for a multiple levels of protection before that data can be identified or broken into. You still have to comply with law enforcement requests. And so we do need a methodology, which is why the Data Technology Board, to agree to things like this. This is the data economy, as Thierry laid out right at the beginning. This is our future. If we don't create transparent rules, shame on all of us. And I think we should cover it in a form that is constructive, that drives openness, but at the same time ensures that citizens are protected for their information. I'm going to take 1 minute more. We laid out data responsibility principles for my company, MasterCard. Let me tell you what they are in simple English. And Thierry and Nicola are going to laugh because they match GDPR. First, it's your data as a consumer, and you have a right to benefit from it. 3, you have a right to be forgotten. 4, you have a right to understand what the heck is being collected about you in simple English, not in legal agreements. 5, you as a company should collect the minimum data you need to be able to conduct your transaction for that consumer, and whatever you collect, you must keep safe. These are not complicated principles for a consumer to understand. They are connected to Nicola's concepts of a citizen's rights. And I don't see why we cannot have a public debate with these principles as the baseline of where we are going.
Thank you. Others would like to respond to this? Monsieur Breton, and then Mabel.
Very quickly, first, I'm in full agreement with Ajay, and I'm sure we'll be able to find a way. But again, we need to be very clear in what we are doing. When we speak about data, you have many kinds of data. We still see the world of data like only being the personal data. I already expressed myself on this. But look, when I was speaking, I think opposing sovereignty and against protection is probably not, at least it's not what we want to do here. Sovereignty means again to be able to decide on our own what we have to decide and what is important for our stakeholder. But again, Europe will never be a protectionist continent, never. On the other hand, we have again, as I said, to establish some rules just to make sure that we can again separate, organize this data flow. Because yes, what is important in this space to have access at the largest amount of data possible. And this is what AI is about. But in order to do this, we need to organize against this data space. For example, if you are a car company, there is some data that you are really willing to keep for you. These are data focused on our R&D department, probably. But there are some data that you would love to share with others, like the one that you get for connected cars, for maintenance, and so on. And it will be interesting to share this with others because you will have a large portfolio of data which will enhance your artificial intelligence applications here. So we will. So again, I cannot say everything we will put in this. It's true. I'm not allowed to say this, but I hope that after looking at our DGA Data Governance Act, you will be optimistic because we wanted to offer also an organization to avoid, like in Europe today or in the US, as I said, the fact that health data are too fragmented. So what kind of KPIs we need to put in place to have a whole health data within Europe? To offer the status of brokers, data brokers, allowing, again, if I want to give my data altruism, to share my data, how could I organize myself? So this is the kind of thing that we need to do. And yes, I fully agree with Ajay. While doing this, we are building the pillar of a bridge. Some others will do differently. But yes, I am absolutely certain that with these pillars, we'll be able to build the bridges that we need between all of us, between the world, to share our data on a secure way and the way we want, not the way others want for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Miao, your turn.
Thank you. Actually, basically, data flow is one of the symbols of globalization itself. But right now, I find data flow, this is a big problem for globalization. We should avoid wielding data as a weapon against each other between different continental places. So probably I was wondering we should continue uphold multilateralism and address the challenge of data security through negotiation, cooperation, and sharing. Leverage those international cooperation mechanisms, including G20, APEC, and through some NGOs, including the higher level standard of free trade mechanism, including CPTPP. I remember exactly CPTPP, including one standard is data flow. Secondly, we need to put both safety and development into consideration. On one hand, every country has its right to enforce laws concerning of data security. On the other hand, these countries should provide a friendly environment for the enterprises co-working on business connected with the data. Finally, we must stick to justice and fairness to avoid what I said, avoid the wielding data as against each other. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Does someone else want to respond to that? Or yes? Or are we done? Listen, I have been so pleased with this panel. You've all been responsive, interesting. It's a very complicated topic, and I appreciate everyone's goodwill, everyone's responses, and I wish you all fortitude, best of luck, and Mr. Breton, really for you too, a very hard job you have. Thank you to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, many thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.